Tonight, we embark on a journey into the treacherous waters of medieval history to uncover a fascinating and often overlooked phenomenon: piracy. While our minds frequently drift to the golden age of sail when thinking of buccaneers, centuries before, the Middle Ages fostered its own formidable breed of maritime raiders, figures as daring and, at times, as ruthless as any later legend. These were not merely shadowy, anonymous figures. They were individuals, etched into the rough-hewn tapestry of their time, whose lives were as dramatic and compelling as any whisper of fiction. This is a story of the chaotic world that inadvertently forged these formidable figures, the subtle methods they employed, and the profound, rippling impact they cast upon medieval society. Settle in, as we gently draw back the veil on the extraordinary lives and chilling, yet quiet, legacies of Eustace the Monk, Klaus Störtebeker, John Crabbe, and Jeanne de Clisson, the true, albeit lesser-known, Blackbeards of the Middle Ages. So, before you settle in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always intriguing to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps light an incense or two for that soothing fragrance. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The medieval world, for all its grounded castles and winding forest paths, was profoundly shaped by the restless waters that embraced its shores. The vastness of the oceans, the intricate dance of tides, and the constant murmur of waves against the land all contributed to a unique environment, one that, perhaps surprisingly, offered fertile ground for a particular kind of wild growth: the seeds of plunder. To understand the figures who would become medieval Europe's most feared pirates, we must first immerse ourselves in the very currents that carried them into being. Imagine the sprawling map of medieval Europe, a mosaic of kingdoms, duchies, and city-states, rarely in harmonious accord. In those early centuries, particularly, the concept of a strong, centralized naval power was largely a distant dream. Coastlines, long and convoluted, stretched largely unpatrolled, offering countless inlets, hidden coves, and shallow estuaries, perfect havens for those who sought to live outside the nascent reach of law. A power vacuum, a void on the vast blue expanse, quietly beckoned. This was an age of endemic conflict, where skirmishes flared like brush fires across the land, and the lines between legitimate warfare, sanctioned privateering, and outright piracy often blurred with disquieting ease. A lord might issue a letter of marque and reprisal, a seemingly official document allowing a private ship owner to seize enemy vessels in recompense for a perceived wrong. But once at sea, with little oversight and immense temptation, the distinction between a sanctioned act and an opportunistic act of plunder could dissolve like salt in the waves. A ship might claim to be acting on behalf of a duke, but would just as readily prey on any vessel laden with goods, regardless of allegiance. The geography itself conspired to nurture this maritime wildness. The long, intricate coastlines of Europe, from the choppy expanses of the North Sea to the winding fjords of the Baltic, and the busy thoroughfare of the English Channel, were a pirate's dream. They presented countless hiding spots, intricate archipelagos, and easy targets for a swift hit-and-run raid before melting back into the misty horizons. It was a landscape that whispered of opportunity for the bold and the desperate. And desperate, or simply ambitious, many were. The medieval period, often perceived as insular, was in fact a time of burgeoning maritime trade. The Hanseatic League, a powerful confederation of merchant guilds and market towns, orchestrated a vast network of commerce across the Baltic and North Seas. Anglo-Flemish trade routes hummed with activity, carrying wealth between islands and the continent. These were not just routes. They were arteries of wealth, pumping valuable commodities from one port to another, creating targets almost too tempting to ignore. Picture the holds of these sturdy, but often slow, merchant vessels. Aromatic spices from distant lands, rolls of fine textiles, casks of rich wine, sacks of grain, towering stacks of timber, and even chests of glinting precious metals. Each cargo represented a fortune, a tangible reward for those willing to brave the perils of the sea and the wrath of authorities. For many coastal dwellers, especially when harvests failed or economies faltered, a life of honest toil yielded little. Piracy, with its promise of swift, albeit dangerous, wealth, offered a desperate means of survival, or perhaps a quicker path to a life free from the gnawing hunger of poverty. The rhythmic lapping of waves against a lonely shore could, for some, become the siren song of illicit opportunity. The ships themselves, while capable, were also profoundly vulnerable. The workhorses of medieval maritime trade were vessels like the robust cogs, with their single mast and square sail, designed for cargo more than speed or maneuverability. Galleys, propelled by the rhythmic pull of oars, offered more agility but were largely confined to calmer, coastal waters. And then there were the echoes of the past, the longships, a legacy of the Viking Age, still inspiring design for their speed and rating. These vessels, though adapted for both commerce and war, were slow to turn, reliant on the winds, and often ill-equipped to defend themselves against a concerted attack. Navigation, too, offered little advantage to the beleaguered merchant. Mariners largely hugged the coastlines, relying on familiar landmarks and rudimentary tools. This predictability, this steady, known path, made them easy to intercept for those who knew the waters and lay in wait. Naval combat, when it occurred, was a brutal affair of boarding actions, a chaotic clash of bodies on a rolling deck. Weapons were simple but effective, bows and crossbows raining down bolts, swords clanging against shields, and axes cleaving through wood and bone. The widespread use of gunpowder weapons on ships was still a distant thunder, leaving naval engagements as grimly intimate affairs. Indeed, the very concept of maritime raiding had deep roots in the collective memory of medieval Europe. The Viking Age, stretching from the 8th to the 11th centuries, had left an indelible mark. These Norse seafarers, archetypal raiders and explorers, had perfected the art of the swift, devastating coastal attack, their longships appearing as if from the very mists of the sea. Their legacy of daring and plunder set a powerful precedent, a blueprint for maritime warfare and raiding culture that resonated through the centuries, quietly shaping the mindset of those who looked to the sea for their fortune. And then there was the local power dynamic. Feudal Europe was a patchwork of allegiances, and at sea, this often translated into a kind of gentle anarchy. Powerful coastal lords, dukes, and even high-ranking church officials, like bishops, were not always above engaging in, or at least tacitly supporting, piratical ventures. For them, it was a swift means of enriching their coffers, acquiring desirable goods, or simply harassing a rival without engaging in full-scale, costly land warfare. The sea, in essence, became an extension of their feuds and ambitions. Most medieval powers did not possess the luxury of maintaining large, permanent navies. Instead, they relied on requisitioning merchant ships in times of need or calling upon feudal levies for naval campaigns. This absence of a constant, pervasive naval presence created a void, a quiet, unpoliced space where pirates could thrive, growing bolder with each unchallenged passage. Thus, the stage was set. A fragmented political landscape, ceaseless conflicts, rich maritime trade, vulnerable ships, and the lingering echoes of past raiders, all combined to create a unique breeding ground. The rhythm of the waves, the vast, empty horizons, and the promise of untold riches lay side by side with profound risks. It was into this complex, often lawless, world that the figures we are about to explore emerged, ready to seize their opportunities from the generous, yet perilous, bounty of the medieval seas. A rhythm, then, like the ebb and flow of the tide. Trade, opportunity, plunder. Then again, as the quiet rhythms of the sea continued to shape medieval life, a different kind of current began to stir, carrying an unlikely figure from the serene cloisters of a monastery into the tumultuous waters of piracy. This is the story of Eustace the Monk, a man whose astonishing transformation from a Benedictine monk to one of the most feared and opportunistic pirates of the English Channel speaks volumes about the shifting allegiances and blurred lines of the age. Eustace's origins were certainly unconventional. Born in Boulogne, France, in the late 12th century, he began his adult life not with a sword or a ship, but with a cowl and quiet contemplation within the Benedictine order. Picture him, the hushed halls, thick with the scent of old parchment and beeswax, the measured cadence of prayer echoing softly through ancient stone. This was a life of quiet devotion, of scholarly pursuit, a stark contrast to the tumultuous existence that lay ahead. What compels a man from such a life? History offers whispers, not certainties. Perhaps it was a yearning for something more, a driving ambition that chafed against the monastic confines, a scandal that forced his hand, or simply the irresistible pull of adventure in a world ripe with it. Whatever the impetus, Eustace cast off his monk's robes and embraced a dramatically different path, transitioning into a mercenary captain. This early career, surprisingly, would lay a crucial foundation for his later piratical prowess. The discipline of the monastery, coupled with the strategic thinking and leadership skills he honed in mercenary service, skills like literacy, careful planning, and commanding men, would prove invaluable on the high seas. He entered the turbulent world of feudal disputes, initially involving himself in a specific conflict that led to his outlaw status, thus setting him on a course from which there was no return. The world outside the monastery walls was harsh and unforgiving, but for Eustace, it offered a different kind of freedom, a dangerous allure he seemingly could not resist. His chosen domain was the English Channel, a narrow, often tempestuous stretch of water that acted as both a crucial bridge and a strategic barrier between the burgeoning powers of England and France. Control of this waterway meant control over immense wealth from trade, over strategic troop movements, and ultimately, over immense influence in the ongoing power struggles of the era. Eustace, with a keen and almost uncanny understanding of its critical importance, began to build his formidable fleet. How he amassed his ships remains a part of his legend, shrouded in the quiet mists of time. Did he capture them in daring raids, slowly building his strength vessel by vessel through a series of bold attacks? Did he commission them, using the spoils of his early mercenary ventures to fund their construction? Or perhaps, as was often the case in this period where allegiances shifted like the tides, were they provided by powerful patrons, eager to utilize his growing naval acumen for their own intricate ends? The truth likely lies in a subtle blend of all these methods, a testament to his adaptability and resourcefulness. His fleet grew, a collection of fast, agile ships, each capable of swift pursuit and sudden attack, becoming a symbol of his growing power on the waves. What truly defined Eustace, however, was his almost unparalleled opportunism and his infamous habit of shifting allegiances between the English and French crowns. Like a cunning fox observing the landscape, he exploited their relentless rivalry for his own personal gain, serving one side, then the other, always positioning himself where the rewards were greatest. There were documented instances where he sailed under the banner of King John of England, his ships harrying French shipping with calculated precision, disrupting their lines of supply and commerce. Yet, with startling ease, he would later pledge his loyalty and his formidable fleet to King Philip II of France, turning his predatory gaze upon English vessels, disrupting their trade and movement with equal ruthlessness. This constant, calculated betrayal, this dance between rival powers, earned him both immense wealth and a deep-seated distrust from both sides, but for a considerable time, it also granted him a dangerous kind of freedom, a unique leverage in a world where loyalty was often a fragile commodity. His tactics were not merely crude acts of violence. They were those of sophisticated disruption and stealth. He perfected the art of raiding not just merchant ships, laden with their valuable cargoes of wine, spices, and textiles, but also vulnerable coastal towns, their unsuspecting inhabitants often caught unaware by the swift descent of his forces. His attacks were swift, designed to cripple enemy logistics during wartime, severing vital supply lines and causing widespread panic along the coastlines. But Eustace was more than just a blunt instrument of plunder. Accounts speak repeatedly of his cunning, his meticulous intelligence gathering, and his masterful use of deception, even employing disguises or false flags to approach unsuspecting vessels, their crews oblivious until it was too late. He moved with the quiet stealth of a predator, his true intentions often masked until the very last, terrifying moment when his ships emerged from the morning mist. The distant clatter of hooves over cobblestones on a peaceful morning could quickly turn to the chilling sound of unfamiliar voices on the docks, signaling his arrival. Eustace's reign of terror cast a long and unsettling shadow, directly escalating tensions and impacting specific diplomatic efforts and military campaigns between England and France. His very name became synonymous with notoriety among merchants and sailors, a whispered warning on the sea lanes, a phrase exchanged in hushed tones in busy taverns. To the English and French courts, he was a paradox, a valuable, albeit dangerous, asset when allied, a ruthless extension of their own will upon the waves, but an immediate, persistent, and infuriating menace when opposed. His ill-gotten gains were not merely squandered in riotous living. He shrewdly used them to build his power, to expand and maintain his formidable fleet, transforming plunder into a self-sustaining engine of influence and control. He was not merely a pirate. He was a strategic player in the complex chess game of medieval power. But even the most cunning of foxes eventually meets its end, and the tide, inevitably, turns. For Eustace, that end came in the summer of 1217, in a decisive naval engagement known as the Battle of Sandwich. An English force, tired of his opportunistic shifts and relentless depredations, and recognizing the critical threat he posed, finally managed to intercept Eustace's fleet. The battle was fierce, chaotic, a swirling maelstrom of wooden ships, snapping sails, and the grim clash of steel. The air, thick with the scent of salt and exertion, would have hummed with the tension of desperate men. Despite his cunning and his reputation for elusiveness, Eustace's luck, or perhaps his overconfidence, finally ran out. He was captured, dragged from the wreckage of his shattered ambition, and the English, determined to eliminate this persistent and exasperating threat once and for all, made an immediate and brutal decision. Eustace the Monk, the formidable pirate of the Channel, was swiftly beheaded on the deck of an English ship. His body, once cloaked in monastic robes and later in the hardened leather of a mercenary, met a stark and uncompromising end. His story, a testament to the turbulent spirit of the age, quickly became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the perils of ambition and shifting loyalties, cementing his place as a memorable, if deeply controversial, figure in the annals of medieval maritime history. His ghost, perhaps, still watches the tides of the English Channel, a quiet reminder of a monk who traded prayer for plunder and found himself ultimately consumed by the very chaos he embraced. His life echoed the raw, often brutal, realities that shaped the lives of many in that distant era, a world where survival often meant a constant navigation of peril and opportunity. As the echoes of Eustace's exploits faded from the English Channel, a new, more formidable kind of maritime force was stirring in the colder, tempestuous waters of the northern Baltic seas. Here, amidst the windswept islands and vast, often gray, expanses, we encounter the truly legendary figure of Klaus Störtebeker, a name that would become synonymous with the Victual Brothers, Vitalian Bruder in their native Low German, a powerful and highly organized pirate fraternity whose exploits would send shivers down the spines of the wealthy Hanseatic League and reshape maritime security in Northern Europe. His story is not just one of plunder, but of a complex interplay between shifting political landscapes, economic desperation, and the enduring human capacity for both brutal violence and rebellious heroism. To truly understand Störtebeker, one must first grasp the tumultuous origins of the Victual Brothers. Their emergence was deeply rooted in the complex and brutal political landscape of the late 14th century Baltic region. This was a time dominated by the Kalmar Union, an attempt by Queen Margaret I to unite the crowns of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, an endeavor met with fierce resistance, particularly from Swedish nobles. A brutal and protracted war raged between Denmark and Sweden, a conflict that culminated in the protracted and grueling siege of Stockholm, then a pivotal Hanseatic city with strategic importance. It was amidst this grinding conflict, around 1392, that the Victual Brothers first appeared on the historical stage, not as pirates in the conventional sense, but as a seemingly legitimate, albeit rough and ready, naval auxiliary force. Their initial, official role was that of privateers, commissioned specifically by the Mecklenburgian and Swedish factions to supply provisions, victuals, to the besieged city of Stockholm, which was suffering under a Danish blockade. Their mission was ostensibly noble, to break the siege and ensure the survival of the beleaguered populace. They were, at first, seen as necessary agents of war, disrupting enemy shipping and undertaking daring supply runs. They were effectively sanctioned raiders, operating under letters of marque that blurred the lines between warfare and opportunistic seizure. Their actions, while disruptive to Danish interests, were, in the eyes of their patrons, a legitimate extension of the ongoing conflict. They quickly gained a reputation for their daring, their seamanship, and their effectiveness in circumventing Danish naval forces. However, once the immediate crisis of the war concluded and Stockholm was no longer under siege, the need for their services as vital supplies evaporated. The formal justification for their existence vanished. Yet the Victual Brothers found themselves in a precarious position. They were highly trained, experienced, and disciplined maritime fighters, accustomed to a life of danger, plunder, and a certain degree of autonomy. The prospect of returning to a mundane, often impoverished, existence on land held little appeal. Thus, the already thin line between privateer and outright outlaw blurred irrevocably, and then vanished entirely. These formidable men, armed with their ships, their skills, and their network, did not simply disband. Instead, they turned their formidable collective skills to pure piracy, preying indiscriminately on any ship that crossed their path, regardless of its flag or allegiance. This transition from a sanctioned auxiliary force to an independent, self-sustaining menace marked a critical turning point in Baltic maritime history, unleashing a new and unprecedented wave of terror upon the seas. They became, in essence, a rogue naval power. It was during this turbulent post-war period that Klaus Störtebeker rose to undisputed prominence. While much of his early life remained shrouded in the mists of folklore, clouded by centuries of storytelling, his leadership qualities were undeniable. Historical records, though sparse, suggest he was born in Wismar-Verden and, like many men of his time, probably hailed from humble origins. He likely began his seafaring life as an ordinary sailor, learning the brutal realities of the sea and the intricate art of navigation. He emerged as a charismatic, highly intelligent, and exceptionally effective leader among the burgeoning pirate fraternity. His name soon spoken with a mixture of profound fear by his victims and, for some, grudging admiration from those who saw him as a champion against the powerful. He possessed an innate ability to inspire loyalty and command respect, transforming a disparate group of desperate men into a cohesive, formidable fighting force. His operational area encompassed the vast and lucrative trade routes of the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, waters that were the very lifeblood of the Hanseatic League. This powerful alliance of merchant guilds and market towns, primarily German, controlled an immense network of commerce stretching from London and Bruges in the west to Novgorod in the east, and from Bergen in the north to the Livonian cities in the south. Their ships carried everything: precious furs from Russia, timber from Scandinavia, salted fish, grain, salt, textiles from Flanders, and wine from the Rhineland. These vessels, though sturdy, were often slow and designed for cargo capacity rather than speed or maneuverability, making them incredibly rich and irresistible targets for Störtebeker and his brethren. The Hanseatic League's economic might was built on this maritime trade, making any disruption a direct assault on their very existence. The Victual Brothers under Störtebeker were anything but a disorganized rabble. Their pirate tactics were characterized by highly organized raids, executed with chilling precision on unsuspecting merchant convoys. They operated with a surprising degree of strategic foresight. They utilized speed and overwhelming force, often deploying multiple fast-moving ships to swarm targets quickly before any effective resistance could be mounted or distress signals sent. Their boarding actions were swift and brutal, designed to demoralize and overpower their prey instantly. Furthermore, they were exceptionally adept at establishing and maintaining strongholds, using remote, often uninhabited islands like Gotland, especially its strategic port of Visby, which they controlled for a time, and other isolated coastal areas as their secure bases of operation. From these hidden havens, often fortified and well-stocked, they would launch their lightning-fast attacks, melting back into the labyrinthine coastlines, intricate archipelagos, and misty horizons before effective pursuit could be mounted by the often slower and less agile Hanseatic naval forces. They understood the local geography intimately, using its complexities to their advantage for both offense and evasion. It was the wealthy and immensely powerful Hanseatic League that became their primary and most desperate nemesis. Störtebeker and his Victual Brothers inflicted significant disruption and immense financial losses upon Hanseatic merchants, leading to widespread outcry and furious demands for their eradication from every major Hanseatic city, from Hamburg and Lübeck to Danzig and Bremen. The sheer audacity of the pirates became legendary, their attacks threatening the very foundation of the League's economic power, hindering trade, driving up insurance costs, and eroding confidence in maritime commerce. Shipping rates soared, and some routes became too dangerous to ply. The Hanseatic League, along with various princes and lords whose territories were affected, including the Grand Master, the Teutonic Knights, mounted concerted, incredibly expensive, and often frustrated efforts to eradicate the Victual Brothers. This coordinated response, involving multiple powerful entities, was a testament to the sheer scale and severity of the threat Störtebeker and his men posed. They employed spies, offered massive bounties, and eventually equipped large fleets solely for anti-piracy operations, recognizing that their very economic survival depended on neutralizing this menace. Yet, for all his ruthlessness and the terror he inflicted, Störtebeker became an undeniable folk hero to many segments of the population. The famous phrase associated with him, God's friend and the world's enemy, Gott's Freund und aller Weltfeind, perfectly encapsulates this profound duality. To the powerful merchants, the established authorities, and the landed nobility, he was unequivocally a scourge, a lawless menace to order, prosperity, and the very fabric of society. He represented chaos. But to the common people, perhaps those struggling under the weight of feudal authority, crushing debts, or persistent economic hardship, he was perceived differently, a righteous rebel who dared to challenge the established order and redistribute wealth, albeit violently. This perception fostered powerful Robin Hood-esque qualities around his legend, with tales suggesting he stole from the rich, specifically the Hanseatic merchants, seen by some as exploitative, and, perhaps, shared his vast spoils with the poor, or at the very least, provided employment, adventure, and a sense of belonging for desperate men who had few other viable options in a rigid social structure. The legend of his prodigious drinking capacity, particularly his ability to drink a barrel in one gulp. Störtebeker literally means empty the beaker in one gulp in Low German, a nickname reflecting his legendary capacity for alcohol, further added to his larger-than-life persona, cementing his status as a defiant, almost mythical figure of immense physical prowess and reckless abandon. These stories served as a form of popular protest against the powerful. However, even the most enduring legends eventually faced their reckoning. For Störtebeker, this came swiftly and decisively in 1401 with a major naval expedition specifically designed to hunt him down, launched primarily by the city of Hamburg, though likely joined by ships and resources from other resolute Hanseatic cities. This determined and well-equipped force finally managed to trap Störtebeker and his remaining crew in what is often considered the most significant anti-piracy operation of the medieval era. The exact location of his capture varies slightly in historical accounts, but it is generally placed in the vicinity of Heligoland or the mouth of the Weser River. The circumstances of his capture remain vivid in folklore, especially the famous, though likely apocryphal, story of his last request to the executioner. As he stood on the scaffold, facing his grim fate, Störtebeker allegedly offered a final, audacious plea that as many of his men as he could run past after his own beheading, while his head rolled across the deck, should be spared. The executioner, it is said, a figure named Meister Rosenfeld, agreed to this macabre pact. Legend claims Störtebeker's headless body miraculously ran past 11 of his men before a block was placed in its path. However, the authorities, perhaps fearing a mass pardon of such dangerous individuals, brutally reneged on the promise, executing all who had been spared by Störtebeker's final, defiant act. The executioner himself, legend holds, was then executed shortly after, some say to prevent him from boasting of his deed, others to ensure no one else could perform such a feat. The brutal public execution of Störtebeker and his approximately 70 to 73 crew members in Hamburg's Graubruch Square was a gruesome, meticulously staged spectacle. It was intended as a stark, uncompromising deterrent to any who might consider following in their piratical footsteps, a public demonstration of the Hanseatic League's restored authority and ruthless determination. Their heads, freshly severed, were reportedly impaled on stakes along the Elbe River, facing seaward, a chilling warning to all who entered the bustling port of Hamburg, a grim testament to the fate awaiting those who dared to challenge the League's economic might. The sheer number of executions and the public nature of the event underscore the depth of the threat Störtebeker had posed and the League's resolve to crush it. Despite his grisly end, Klaus Störtebeker's enduring legacy is primarily that of an almost mythical folk hero. His legend lives on fiercely in German folklore, in countless songs, poems, plays, and annual festivals that continue to celebrate his spirit of resistance, maritime adventure, and perceived defiance against powerful, often oppressive, authorities. He remains a powerful symbol of rebellion and a testament to the enduring human fascination with outlaws who embody freedom. Modern archaeological finds, such as the discovery of medieval shipwrecks in the Baltic Sea or remnants associated with pirate strongholds on islands like Gotland, occasionally lend a tangible, physical link to the tales of the Victual Brothers and their elusive treasures, further deepening the allure and historical weight of Störtebeker's story. His life and death offer a quiet, yet profound, echo of the complex relationship between law and lawlessness, authority and defiance, and the enduring human spirit in a world far removed from our own, a world where the boundary between hero and villain was often drawn by the victor. He remains a powerful figure, perpetually sailing the seas of collective memory. As the waves churned around the fragmented power structures of medieval Europe, the English Channel remained a dynamic and often brutal stage for maritime ambition and fiercely personal sagas. Here, amidst the constant flow of commerce and conflict, two distinct but equally ruthless figures would leave their indelible marks. John Crabbe, the cunning Flemish pirate and astute merchant, and Jeanne de Clisson, the vengeful Lioness of Brittany. Their stories, though wildly different in motivation, profoundly underscore the diverse and often desperate paths to piracy in this turbulent age. John Crabbe emerged from humble Flemish origins, a background as a merchant and seaman that afforded him invaluable, first-hand knowledge of vital trade routes, the intricacies of ship handling, and practical naval tactics. His early life on the docks and aboard ships undoubtedly instilled in him a deep understanding of maritime commerce, its vulnerabilities, and its immense potential for wealth. His subsequent career epitomized the fluid, often dangerously blurred line between legitimate commerce, sanctioned privateering, a legal form of state-sponsored piracy during wartime, and outright and sanctioned piracy, especially during the frequent and protracted periods of Anglo-Flemish conflict. He navigated this murky boundary with remarkable skill, often switching hats and allegiances depending on the prevailing political winds and his own calculated advantage. He was a survivor, a pragmatist who understood that the quickest path to prosperity often lay outside rigid adherence to law. His primary operational area was, naturally, the English Channel, a narrow, vital waterway that served as a critical economic artery for both England and the continent. Here, he brazenly preyed on shipping, his raids becoming a constant, unwelcome feature, and he frequently found himself embroiled in the complex, shifting naval conflicts between England, France, and his native Flanders. Crabbe's burgeoning reputation was built not just on brute force, but on his sharp strategic thinking, his mastery of deception, and a chilling, yet pragmatic, willingness to employ brutal force when necessary. Anecdotes of his cleverness abound in historical chronicles, painting a vivid picture of a man who could outwit as readily as he could overpower. It was said he employed ingenious stratagems, such as disguising his ships or feigning distress, to lure unsuspecting merchant vessels into traps, or to slip past even the most vigilant naval patrols. His mind as sharp and precise as any blade on his deck. He understood the psychological aspect of warfare as well, often striking where least expected to maximize panic and minimize resistance. What truly set Crabbe apart from many of his contemporaries was his deep and active involvement in the larger political and military struggles of the time, particularly during the early stages of the 100 Years' War. He was not merely a raider for personal gain, though profit was certainly a driving factor. He rapidly became a vital, if mercenary, naval strategist, often explicitly hired by powerful lords or even kings for his expertise in naval warfare and siege tactics. His influence was particularly felt in major military engagements and sieges, such as the pivotal Siege of Berwick in 1333, where his ships and tactical acumen played a significant, arguably decisive, role in blockading the city by sea, contributing directly to its fall. Unlike Eustace the Monk's almost whimsical opportunism and somewhat capricious shifts, Crabbe's fluctuating allegiances were far more calculated, often a meticulously planned strategic maneuver for survival, enhanced profit, or long-term gain within the intricate, perpetually shifting political landscapes of the 100 Years' War and its precursors. He was a master chess player on the sea, understanding the levers of power and how to pull them to his advantage with remarkable foresight. Remarkably, Crabbe's career, unlike those of so many of his contemporaries who met grisly ends on the gallows or by the executioner's axe, did not culminate in a public execution. Instead, he eventually retired from his life of plunder and political maneuvering, a demonstrably wealthy man, having skillfully navigated the perils of his chosen profession and outlived many of his enemies. He settled into a life of respectability, leaving behind a legacy that significantly influenced the naval warfare doctrines and practices of the period. His unique ability to blur the lines between legitimate and illicit maritime operations, and to integrate himself into the highest levels of military strategy, made him a truly exceptional figure among medieval pirates, a testament to his intellect and adaptability. He represented a type of professional pirate, whose cunning often outweighed his brutality. Then, there is the searing, almost operatic tale of Jeanne de Clisson, a Breton noblewoman whose story is steeped in unbearable tragedy and a fierce, uncompromising quest for vengeance. Her life as the esteemed wife of Olivier de Clisson, a prominent Breton lord and military figure, was irrevocably shattered by a single, brutal act of political ruthlessness. Her husband, accused of treason by the capricious French King Philip VI, an accusation many historians believe was politically motivated and baseless, was summarily arrested, subjected to a sham trial, and then publicly executed in Paris in 1343. To add to the unimaginable horror and insult, his severed head was reportedly displayed on a pike at the city gates, a grim, undeniable warning that ignited an inferno of grief, rage, and an unquenchable desire for retribution within Jeanne. This horrific event served as the agonizing catalyst, transforming a grieving noblewoman, once concerned with the affairs of her estates, into the vengeful, terrifying Lioness of Brittany. She vowed a relentless campaign of vengeance against the French crown and its nobility, dedicating her remaining life and fortune to harrying their shipping and striking fear into the hearts of those she held responsible for her husband's demise. Her decision to become a pirate was not born of poverty or opportunistic greed, but of an unyielding, deeply personal quest for justice in an age where royal justice had utterly failed her in the most brutal way imaginable. Driven by this singular, burning purpose, Jeanne then commissioned and outfitted an iconic fleet, which quickly became a chilling symbol of terror on the waves, the Black Fleet. Her flagship, aptly named My Revenge, was reportedly painted entirely black, from hull to mast, with sails of a startling, blood-red hue, a stark and intimidating sight against the pale, often gray, horizon of the channel. She may have had two other ships similarly adorned, creating a truly terrifying squadron. While specific intimidating names for her vessels beyond my revenge are not widely recorded, the very sight of a black and red fleet emerging from a mist was enough to strike profound dread into French hearts, particularly those of the nobility who knew of her relentless vendetta. Her operational area was primarily the English Channel, but her targets were meticulously chosen. She specifically targeted French vessels, particularly those believed to be carrying French nobles, high-ranking officials, or those associated with the French crown, rather than indiscriminately attacking all merchant shipping. Her tactics were chillingly simple and absolute. No survivors among the French nobility. When her ships overwhelmed a French vessel, her policy was to execute French nobles and sometimes even ordinary sailors alike, often personally overseeing the grim work. She would leave only a few alive, usually English prisoners or a handful of common sailors, to tell the tale, ensuring the psychological warfare of her attacks spread far and wide, amplifying the terror. The fear she instilled in French shipping and coastal communities was immense, a direct and devastating consequence of a ruthless commitment to vengeance. Her actions effectively, if implicitly, allied her with the English during the ongoing 100 Years' War, using her piracy as a potent, unpredictable tool to weaken France from within its vital maritime arteries. Jeanne de Clisson, remarkably, eventually retired from her life of piracy, often marrying an English nobleman and living out her remaining years in relative peace. Her legend, however, endures fiercely as that of a formidable, uncompromising, and deeply vengeful woman, a rare female pirate who commanded both chilling respect and profound fear in an age dominated by men. Comparing and contrasting these two figures, John Crabbe, the cunning fox, and Jeanne de Clisson, the avenging lioness, reveals the multifaceted and deeply human motivations behind medieval piracy. John Crabbe was driven by profit, pragmatic survival, and keen political savvy, a master of self-enrichment and navigation in a complex maritime world. His shifts in allegiance were cold, calculated gambits, his ruthlessness a precise tool for strategic advantage and financial gain. Jeanne de Clisson, on the other hand, was propelled by a profound, almost primal, personal grief and an unyielding desire for retribution, transforming her sorrow into a relentless campaign of terror born of a singular, unshakable need for justice. Her actions powerfully showcase how deeply personal grievances, particularly when involving such egregious betrayals by a monarch, could manifest as widespread maritime disruption, demonstrating unequivocally that piracy was not solely about wealth, but could also be a vehicle for a very personal, brutal brand of justice in a world where formal legal recourse was often unreliable or non-existent. Their stories, each unique and compelling, combine to illustrate the rich, diverse tapestry of human experience that defined the medieval seas, reminding us that the Blackbeards of this era were as varied in their drives and origins as they were daring in their exploits. They were both products and shapers of their chaotic, often lawless, times. As the last remnants of medieval seafaring fade into the horizon, becoming mere whispers carried on the wind, the stories of figures like Eustace the Monk, Klaus Störtebeker, John Crabbe, and Jeanne de Clisson continue to ripple through the vast currents of history, leaving behind a legacy that is both complex and often profoundly contradictory. Their lives, meticulously played out on the turbulent, unforgiving stage of the medieval seas, were far more than simple acts of opportunistic plunder. They were profound reflections of their chaotic and evolving times, shaping not only immediate events but also enduring perceptions of law, war, the nascent concept of national sovereignty, and the very nature of maritime power for centuries to come. One of the most significant and often understated impacts of these medieval pirates was their profound and undeniable influence on the foundational evolution of maritime law and the eventual development of organized, standing naval powers across Europe. In the early and High Middle Ages, the seas were largely a realm of fragmented authority, a sprawling, watery frontier where the concept of universally enforced maritime law was, at best, a nascent and theoretical ideal. Coastal jurisdictions often clashed over territorial rights, and the ambitious notion of a nation-state's absolute sovereignty over its territorial waters was still a distant, almost utopian, dream. This legal vacuum created fertile ground for illicit activities, making the enforcement of any single code incredibly challenging. The widespread and audacious activities of powerful groups like the Victual Brothers, who essentially operated as a de facto state within a state on the Baltic Sea, complete with their own fortified bases, sophisticated networks of intelligence, and well-organized supply chains, forced the hands of emerging national monarchies and powerful economic entities like the Hanseatic League. Their persistent depredations, which often verge on outright economic warfare, crippling trade and creating widespread panic, highlighted with stark clarity the urgent and undeniable need for more robust naval defenses, clearer definitions distinguishing between sanctioned privateering and outright criminal piracy, and, crucially, a greater degree of international cooperation to effectively police the vast and often lawless maritime expanses. The very act of forming large-scale, organized naval expeditions, meticulously planned and executed with unprecedented coordination, like the one that finally cornered and captured Störtebeker, laid the critical groundwork for the gradual development of professional, standing navies. This marked a significant departure from the often inefficient and haphazard practice of ad hoc requisitioning of merchant vessels for defense, signaling a growing understanding that maritime security required dedicated, professional forces. Furthermore, the continuous and escalating threat posed by these formidable pirates spurred practical and often desperate innovations in shipbuilding and naval technology. There was a clear and urgent demand for faster, more maneuverable vessels, better equipped for pursuit and evasion, and a pressing need for improvements in navigational techniques to anticipate and avoid pirate strongholds or to quickly track and intercept raiders. Naval architecture began to adapt its designs, not just for the traditional purposes of trade or conventional state-on-state warfare, but specifically for anti-piracy operations, emphasizing speed, robust defensive capabilities, and the ability to project power over wider areas. This era saw a practical evolution in ship design directly attributable to the exigencies of combating medieval piracy, leading to more specialized maritime vessels. Beyond the immediate legal and military repercussions, these medieval pirates left an indelible and enduring mark on the cultural imagination, subtly but profoundly shaping the very archetype of the pirate that would later be popularized and romanticized in the golden age of sail. While the imagery might differ significantly from later cliches, no eye patches or talking parrots yet, and the ships were often less grand than later galleons, the core elements of daring, audacious defiance against established authority, a life lived outside the strictures of conventional society, and a certain wild freedom were firmly established in the popular consciousness. Klaus Störtebeker, in particular, transcended his role as a May outlaw and plunderer to become a genuine folk hero, symbolizing a romanticized resistance against what was often perceived as oppressive and unjust authority. His legend, diligently passed down through generations in countless songs, epic poems, dramatic plays, and vibrant oral traditions, demonstrated the profound human tendency to romanticize figures who courageously challenge the powerful, embodying a spirit of freedom and rebellion that resonates even today, centuries later. The captivating tales of his audacious feats, his rumored generosity to the poor, and his defiant end cemented his place not just in historical records but in the very fabric of German folklore, illustrating how ordinary people, struggling under feudal burdens or economic hardship, could find unlikely heroes in unexpected, often illicit, places, seeing in these outlaws a reflection of their own struggles against perceived injustice and an aspiration for a more equitable existence. This cultural legacy speaks volumes about the popular perception of power and resistance in the medieval period. However, it is crucial, when examining these captivating narratives, to remember that the gritty reality of medieval piracy was often far from romantic or heroic. For the thousands of merchants whose livelihoods were destroyed, for their crews who faced brutal violence or even death, for the coastal communities living under constant threat, and for the countless families whose very existence depended on the precarious maritime trade, piracy was a terrifying, devastating, and immediate reality. It meant widespread economic ruin for individuals and entire communities, the brutal and often agonizing loss of lives, and a constant, gnawing fear that permeated every aspect of maritime activity, from casting off ropes to returning to port. The disruption to vital trade routes was immense and systemic, directly impacting nascent national economies, hindering growth, and severely limiting the vital free flow of goods, raw materials, and even crucial ideas across a continent that was slowly but surely becoming more interconnected through commerce. The pervasive fear of encountering a black-sailed vessel, or recognizing an infamous flag on the horizon, cast a long, dark, and palpable shadow over every single voyage. This ubiquitous fear, in time, often led to significantly higher costs for all manner of goods, as merchants were forced to factor in the substantial risks of plunder, the necessary expense of armed escorts, and increased insurance premiums. This burden ultimately impacted everyone from the wealthiest noble craving exotic spices from the East to the humblest peasant dependent on imported grain for survival. The very fabric of medieval society, intricately reliant on trade for everything from basic necessities to luxury goods, and crucially, strategic resources for warfare, was continuously and profoundly threatened by these audacious maritime raiders, creating a persistent drain on prosperity and security. Moreover, the stories of medieval pirates serve as fascinating and exceptionally rich case studies in the complex and often fluid interplay between individual agency and the broader geopolitical landscape of the era. Figures like Eustace the Monk and John Crabbe were not isolated anomalies or mere coincidences in the tapestry of history. They were deeply rooted products of their turbulent environment, shrewd individuals who masterfully exploited the power vacuums, the chronic lack of centralized control, and the constant, internecine conflicts between rival kingdoms and feudal lords. Their remarkable ability to switch allegiances with ease, to leverage their exceptional maritime skills and strategic acumen for political and military gain, speaks volumes about the fragmented and often chaotic nature of medieval authority and the desperate, often ruthless, measures adopted by those seeking power, quite simply, survival in a cutthroat world. Jeanne de Clisson's tragic and deeply personal story, on the other hand, highlights the intensely individual and emotional motivations that could drive an individual, even a noblewoman, to adopt a life of piracy. Her transformation, from profound personal grief and a desire for retribution into a widespread campaign of terror, demonstrates unequivocally that piracy was not solely about the accumulation of wealth or simply opportunistic plunder. It could also serve as a potent and visceral vehicle for a deeply personal, brutal brand of justice in a period often characterized by its pervasive lawlessness and the brutal, often arbitrary, nature of feudal power dynamics. These diverse narratives, each unique in their specific circumstances, origins, and motivations, combined to illustrate the rich, complex, and often violent tapestry of human experience that define the medieval seas. They serve as a powerful reminder that the Blackbeards of this distant era were as varied in their drives, social standing, and methods as they were daring in their legendary exploits. They were both products and, crucially, shapers of their chaotic, often lawless, and constantly evolving times. In conclusion, the medieval pirates were far more than just common brigands of the sea. They were formidable adversaries who relentlessly pushed the boundaries of law, warfare, and economic stability, directly catalyzing the fundamental evolution of maritime power and significantly shaping the very course of naval history. They were opportunists of the highest order, brilliant strategists, and, in some cases, profoundly vengeful figures whose individual sagas captured the raw, often brutal, realities of their age with chilling clarity. Their legends, imbued with defiance, an undeniable daring, and a certain rebellious charisma, continue to whisper through the waves, a quiet yet powerful reminder of a time when the boundaries between soldier, merchant, and outlaw were as shifting and unpredictable as the tides themselves. The Blackbeards of the Middle Ages may not have worn tricorn hats or flown the iconic Jolly Roger, but their enduring legacy, carved indelibly in the salt spray and the profound fear of their countless victims, is no less profound, forever echoing in the vast, restless expanse of the sea. The sea, then, as now, holds its secrets, its stories, and its quiet, rhythmic heartbeat, ever ready to remind us of those who dared to defy its calm.